I accept a month-long challenge to teach a group of curious children about animals by spending exactly 1 hour a day in an interactive storytelling class called the Garden Classroom. Each day, an animal comes alive through story, sound, and a small activity. Facts are woven into the plot, so the children both feel and learn. Patience from a tortoise, migration from herds, pollination from bees, empathy from rescued kittens, and conservation from rainforest tales. Along the way, a shy child, Arjun, grows braver. Another child, Leela, channels curiosity into a community garden that becomes a living lab. A practical crisis, a sudden storm, and a school schedule change threatens the 1 hour ritual, forcing the group to test what they've truly learned: cooperation, adaptability, and applying small actions that add up. In the end, they present an animal fair at the town park, teach parents what they learned in 1 hour a day, and realize that education measured in hours can be measured, more importantly, in curiosity, care, and small daily habits. The story. Expanded scenes. Each sentence from the summary expanded. Scene 1. The promise. Expanded. I remember the exact way the late afternoon light pooled on the old wooden table the day I made the promise. The light looked like spilled honey, and the calendar on my wall had a blank rectangle for the month ahead. A space that felt like a dare. 1 hour a day, I told myself, tapping the tip of a pencil against that blank. The idea had come from a parent meeting where everyone wished for more time, but fewer of us had the energy to follow through. I wanted to prove something small, stubborn, and kind, that a single hour each day, focused and playful, could teach children not only facts about animals, but a deeper way of paying attention. My classroom became the test. We converted the corner by the window into what I called the garden classroom. Potted basil, a low, weathered bench, a rug stitched from old scarves, and a clock painted with animals around its edge. I painted the hour hand bright orange and called it the story hand. The children, 6 to 8 years old and all different kinds of fast and slow, began to congregate there with backpacks and sometimes a scraped knee. The hour started at 3 o'clock exactly. I learned to signal the change. A small bell, a stretch, and the line, "Once upon a listening," a phrase that the kids repeated as if it were a secret password. On the first day, the challenge felt like practicing a magic trick that only I believed in. I had planned the first story for Tico the tortoise, the slowest hero I could imagine. Tico arrived in the story not as a lecture about shells, but as a traveler who had seen the same path for 100 small suns. The children leaned forward. I described the weight of the shell like a small house and the funny way Tico hummed to himself while he walked. Between paragraphs, I paused and asked eyes to guess what Tico might eat today, and then we actually tasted the crunchy lettuce I had tucked into my bag. Learning in the garden classroom was tactile and noisy in the best way, a garden of questions. That first hour taught me as much as it taught them. I discovered the delicate rhythm of pausing, asking, and letting silence do the teaching. Kids would think in the quiet, and sometimes a single, simple observation, "Does a tortoise ever hurry?" would outstrip a whole paragraph of facts. By the time the bell rang to end the hour, the children had learned two things. They could be patient listeners, and they had a small, bright fact about tortoise life tucked into their pockets. I realized the power of a promise kept daily. It turned a conceptual lesson into a ritual, and rituals become stories the children keep telling themselves, even outside the classroom. Activity, 2 to 3 minutes. Ask the children to stretch like Tico. Slowly, reach, breathe, and take 3 steps as if each one were precious. Then let them whisper one new word they learned into a listening jar, a jar where you keep favorite words.
Scene 2. The garden classroom and how it works expanded. The garden classroom became more than a corner of the room. It became the stage for an experiment in slow, rich learning. I arranged cushions in a circle and hung a map on the wall. Not a map of countries, but of habitats: desert, ocean, forest, grassland. On the back table sat props: a soft plush bee, a wooden boat, a shell, a jar with a painted sun. Each prop was a key I would use to unlock the next hour's animal. I quickly learned that structure matters. The hour was split into 4 parts: 10 minutes of welcoming and a sensory game, 25 minutes of story, the core, 15 minutes of an activity that reinforced a science fact, and 10 minutes for reflection and the daily dare, a small practical thing to try at home. Timing was strict but gentle. The story hand moved and we moved with it. Children liked the predictability. Parents liked a concision. But what mattered most was the content of the story and whether it invited the kids to do something that made the lesson stick. At first, I used voices to differentiate the animals. Tico's slow vowels, the sparrow's high chirp. Then I began to invite children into the voice work. "Who can squeak like a sparrow?" I'd ask. When children took turns, they were not performing so much as trying on being another living thing, a little empathy exercise disguised as play. Through voice and movement, they learn that animals have needs and behaviors that fit the shape of their lives. The heart of the garden classroom was not just facts delivered cleanly, it was facts worn and experienced. One afternoon, Leela, a child with a forever curious face who always asked why, brought a jar of honey from her kitchen. She wanted to know if bees liked stories. That day, we told Buzzy's tale, a bee who fancied herself an explorer. As I read, I scattered bright yellow paper flowers across the rug. Each child became a flower. A volunteer bee fluttered from lap to lap, a timed jump around the circle, collecting pollen beads and dropping them at the end into a small jar. When we counted the beads, the concept of pollination snapped into place, as if it had always been waiting there, ready to be noticed. We followed the activity with a drawing challenge. Draw one thing the bee did. The pictures were noisy and immediate. There was a clarity to the way the children translated motion into line. The garden classroom had rules: the story hand's promise, the listening jar, a rule about hands staying gentle. But it was also loose in the ways that mattered. If a child needed to step outside for a minute, they did. If a question took 5 minutes to unspool into a tiny research hunt, we gave it 5. The schedule tightened our container, but the stories opened the container wide. Activity, 5 to 7 minutes. Bee role play. Give each child 3 small beads, pollen, and have them walk, to 3 different paper flowers. At the end, ask, which flowers had the most beads? And lead a short talk about how that helps plants. Scene 3. Animals that teach expanded. Each animal in our stories had 2 jobs: to be an interesting character and to teach one clear scientific or ethical idea. Tico taught patience and habitat basics. Buzzy taught pollination and the fact that bees visit hundreds of flowers a day. The sparrows introduced migration and seasons. The river frogs taught about life cycles and nocturnal life. The elephant showed memory and the importance of family networks. By turning the animals into characters with desires and small internal conflicts, the facts slipped in almost without friction. I remember how Arjun, the shy boy who usually sat with his chin in his hands, would brighten when the story involved an animal who had to overcome fear. Once, in a story about a fledgling sparrow named Suri, who was afraid to leave the nest, Arjun whispered, "She sounds like me." After that day, he volunteered to be the story sparrow, flapping his arms and reading one short line I had written for him. That small act, one line, changed how he sat in class for the following weeks. He began to ask questions about nests, then about migration, then about maps. Learning multiplied because the story touched his private life. I organized each hour to end with a daily dare, one small, concrete task the children could perform at home. For the sparrow day, the dare was simple. Go outside and count birds for 5 minutes, then draw the ones you saw. For the bee day, it was put a bit of sugar water on a plate outside and watch the insects, safely and with adult supervision. The dares invited parents into the process. I would write them on colored cards and send them home in small envelopes. The envelopes became a ritual connector between classroom and kitchen, between 1 hour and the rest of the day. From the second week onward, the stories gained a rhythm of their own. Parents began to report little changes. Leela planted a small basil pot using seeds she had saved from the classroom. Arjun decided he liked ladybugs and began to carry a magnifying glass in his backpack. Small daily habits sprouted. The garden out the window, once neat, once patchy, started to thicken because children took the dares as invitations to try things more than once. But the learning wasn't all tidy facts and neat dares. One story about a night frog that used the moon to call its friends led to a child misunderstanding. Do frogs sing songs? That prompted a lovely group investigation of what we mean by sing, how sound works, and how humans sometimes describe animal behaviors using human words. We clarified and measured with claps and tape measures for the distance sound traveled in the classroom, and we laughed. That confusion turned into a deeper precision. Kids learned scientific vocabulary because the story made them want to know the right word.
Activity, 5 to 8 minutes. Life cycle chain. Give 4 cards: egg, tadpole, froglet, frog. Have kids arrange them in order, then act out 1 stage each. Discuss differences. Scene 4. Subplots. Garden project and the lost kitten. Expanded. Stories are richer when they have echoes in the real world, so I seeded 2 small subplots that would run across weeks. The first was the garden project, a patch outside the classroom where we'd plant things the stories needed. Nectar flowers, a tiny pond for frogs, a shady shrub for birds. The second was a small, more tender story that began when the school cat, a stray calico we called Patches, had a kitten that got lost one rainy afternoon. The kitten subplot opened possibilities for empathy, for practical care, and for talking about how human actions affect animals. We began the garden project with a list of needs. The kids drew pictures and we pinned them around our habitat map. Butterflies need milkweed, Leela informed us after a book she'd checked out at the library. What about bees? Asked Arjun, careful now with his words. Sunflowers, someone shouted, and the class clapped. We divided tasks: watering teams, seed planters, compost collectors. These roles taught responsibility and the science of plant care in a way no worksheet could. Then the kitten disappeared. It happened the week of our rainforest rescue story, which was rich with talk about habitats and how trees are home to many creatures. The kitten's disappearance made the rainforest feel less abstract. We organized a search. Some kids held flashlights, others made little posters. The search was full of small heroics, a boy idly checking under a bush and finding the kitten shivering, caked in mud. The rescue became a teachable moment. We washed the kitten gently, constructed a small cardboard house, and researched what kittens need. But it became more than that. Caring for the kitten required negotiation with parents about shelter resources, a lesson in civic responsibility. Those subplots had slow arcs. The garden project grew in stages. First seedlings sprouted, then bees actually visited one morning, and the kids squealed with wonder. The kitten, adopted by a local family, inspired a class project, a list of ways a community can help animals. Donation drives, volunteer at the shelter, build birdhouses. The subplots looped back into the main story by the time we reached the town fair. The children displayed their garden and told the kitten's rescue story as part of a stand about compassion. Activity: 10 minutes. Seed plant. Each child plants one fast-growing seed in a cup. Label it, place by the window, and record growth daily for the week. Scene 5. The test of the promise. Storm and schedule change. Expanded. Then the test came not as a pop quiz, but as weather and bureaucracy. A late storm rolled in on a Thursday with steady rain and a power outage across the neighborhood. The school canceled after-school programs for the week. For many of us, the 1-hour promise depended on the hinge of the school clock. Once the hinge rattled, the hour threatened to fall apart. I felt the same gnawing worry any teacher does when routine is endangered. Would the small ritual unravel? The children arrived on storm day, damp and electric with the weather. Some parents could not make it. The principal asked me to compress my hour into a shorter assembly slot the next day. I considered giving up the challenge, the rational adult thing to do. Then Arjun, who had begun to carry his magnifying glass, tugged on my sleeve and asked if we could still tell a story, even for a little while. The insistence of a child clarified a truth I had been trying to prove. The value of the hour wasn't the clock alone, but the commitment to do something daily. So we adapted. We moved the hour to the morning, and instead of an elaborate activity, we did a listening ritual. Each child closed their eyes and we recorded the storm sounds, the rhythm of rain on leaves. We imagined a river creature, a fish that liked storms because storms brought fresh food. And we used the sound to talk about adaptations. The change of schedule forced creativity. I learned to shrink and expand, to convert complex activities into micro-lessons that still engaged the senses. The children responded to scarcity by being more inventive. They used paper cups as drums, drew maps of imagined river currents, and wrote short postcards to the kitten's new family, telling them what they had learned about shelter and safety. Outside the classroom, parents began to notice the resiliency in the children. They reported that their kids were less likely to get upset when plans changed. The 1-hour ritual had taught not only facts, but a muscle for flexibility. The crisis taught me something improbable, that constraints can make creativity bloom if the aim is clear. Our aim had been small and stubborn, an hour per day, but it was built on rituals and small practices that could bend without snapping. This was the night before the town fair. The storm had rinsed the world and left it smelling like cleaned soil. The children were quieter and more intense in their preparations. They rehearsed tiny presentations. Arjun would speak about ladybugs, Leela about pollination, and a group would demonstrate how to plant a seed quickly and cleanly. The fairness of the storm had been to amplify what mattered, the kids' ability to apply small lessons to real circumstances.
Activity. Short adaptation. Storm listening. Invite children to close eyes and list 3 sounds they hear. Use those sounds to write a 2-line poem as a group. Scene 6. The fair, the showcase, and what an hour can do. Expanded. The town park on the fair day smelled of frying spices and cut grass. We set up a small rectangle of cloth for the garden classroom and pinned our habitat map beside a table of seedlings. Families wandered by. The kids were small orators. Leela crouched beside a pot and explained pollination like a grown-up, using a toy bee to show how pollen moves. Arjun, who had once been hesitant to speak, held up a magnifying glass and demonstrated how to look for tiny insect feet. He explained, with proud, slow confidence, how insects were friends of the garden. Parents listened, surprised and moved. We built interactive stations. Make a seed ball. Listen to a frog. Map an animal's home. People paused at the kitten rescue board and read the story the children had written about finding the kitten under the bush. I watched as community members, some of them strangers who'd never been in our classroom, learned something and smiled. The children were teachers now. Their hour had multiplied into the town. At the end of the fair, we gathered the children in a circle, and I asked what they had most enjoyed. Their answers were not facts alone, though facts were plentiful. They were small, human phrases. I liked hearing Tico hum. I liked seeing the bee beads. I planted basil, and it smells good. The words made a kind of music. I realized the truth I had suspected from the beginning. The hour's success was measured not by how many facts a child memorized, but by how many small habits they practiced and how much curiosity they carried forward.